The US made us believe that Venezuela is nothing but a drug cartel country, but there is more to this country than meets the eye. And they don't want us understanding the intricacies of this power that Venezuela has because they want to keep the Venezuelan people begging for support from big old America instead of advancing their country. And you better believe that if the US cannot leverage Venezuela, they are losing power and control on the world stage. And we've seen them throw tantrums for far less. But right now, let's dig into how much power Venezuela actually wields on this grand stage. Venezuela does not act like a traditional great power. It does not dominate through military reach or global brands, does not control global banks or media. Its power works differently. It's asymmetric. That means it relies on leverage, position, and endurance. This kind of power is quieter, it is slower, and it is harder to remove. First of all, they have energy leverage. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on earth, an estimated 303 billion barrels, way more than most other countries. But here is the thing, just having the oil in the ground doesn't mean that it's easy to use. Production has dropped a lot because of sanctions and a lack of investment. Still, the fact that those reserves exist changes how governments and companies make energy plans. Traders, importers, and energy ministers think years ahead. And they keep Venezuela on the map because of its potential. You can ignore the output today, but you cannot ignore the largest oil reserve holder when you plan global energy supplies. That puts Venezuela in every serious long-term energy calculation, even when actual production is low. And that gives the country ongoing strategic weight. And then they use sanctions resilience as a signal. Venezuela has lived under heavy US sanctions for many years. Most nations would struggle under that kind of pressure. But Venezuela adapted by using alternative routes and trade methods to keep crude moving, even when markets tried to shut it out. People watching this, especially countries that fear future sanctions, study how Venezuela manages to survive, even imperfectly. That makes Venezuela a reference point, not a cautionary tale. Others see that governments can find ways to resist pressure to keep some economy going and maintain foreign relationships. That kind of experience is valuable because it shows that resistance is possible, even when powerful states try to isolate you. That resilience becomes a quiet form of power because it changes how other states think about their own security and strategy. Of course, their alignment with counter hegemonic blocs plays a role too. Venezuela works with Russia, China, Iran, and other countries tied to BRICS, and this is based on practical exchange. None of these people are actually friends, per se. Well, I don't think so. But Venezuela offers oil, access to markets, a political stance against US pressure. In return, it gets financing, technical support, infrastructure help, and diplomatic backing. So this network increases Venezuela's influence beyond what its economy alone could do. For example, China buys Venezuelan oil and has investment ties in the sector, making Venezuela economically connected to to Asia. Russia has extended joint oil ventures and deepened cooperation in trade and loans. Iran has historical energy and political ties that stretch back years as part of a shared opposition to US dominance. We know the story there. So, when you tie into multiple large states actively cooperating, your geopolitical relevance grows. Venezuela's economy may be struggling, but its strategic alignments give it a role in power networks to challenge Western dominance. So, also, Venezuela sits in a strategic place. It has Caribbean access. It is close to US shores. It also connects to South America's trade routes. So, what happens in Venezuela affects shipping lanes, energy transport, and regional security. Geography does not change because of sanctions. You cannot move a country. Any serious power planning in the Western Hemisphere must consider Venezuela's location. That keeps it relevant, whether the United States likes it or not. Venezuela's refusal to accept regime change under pressure sends a pretty strong message. When a country resists external power, others watch closely. They think, oh, okay, if Venezuela can stand, if Venezuela can stand, maybe then we can stand too. Some governments stay quiet, but that doesn't mean that they are not paying attention. That they probably just fear being the next target in most cases. Proving a state cannot be easily replaced gives it symbolic strength. And quiet allies respect resilience in a world where strong nations push influence, often without pushback. It is important to understand how they use time as a weapon. Venezuela understands that power is not always shown in immediate victories. US administrations change, attention shifts with new crises. Sanctions and blockades lose priority over time. What looks like isolation today could become negotiation tomorrow. Because Venezuela stays standing under pressure, the balance slowly changes. Those pushing control find that their leverage erodes. Resilience turns time into an advantage that other nations cannot ignore in long term global strategy. So now let's connect all of these together and what do we get? Venezuela does not need to win outright every battle. What matters is staying in the game so that the world cannot forget that it exists. Oil gives it relevance. Surviving sanctions teaches lessons that other nations want to learn. Partnerships with Russia, China, and others, even in Africa, widen its influence. Geography keeps it in global planning. Legal arguments challenge powerful states, and refusing to collapse builds quiet support. Time weakens pressure and strengthens its position. In combination, these factors create real strategic power. This is why the US wants Venezuela portrayed as simple and broken. People believe that it is just a failed state. They will not question aggressive policies. They will not ask why so much effort goes into controlling it. They will not notice that leverage is being contested. Keeping the story simple keeps control easy. But the reality is a lot more complex. Venezuela sits at the intersection of energy, law, geography, and global rivalry. It exposes how much the current world order depends on pressure rather than agreement. When Venezuela resists it, it reveals cracks in that system. That makes it dangerous to those who rely only on dominance. Venezuelan people pay a heavy price in this struggle. Of course, sanctions hurt daily life. Shortages, inflation, and instability are real, but from a global view, the state's endurance still matters. Power politics often ignore human cost. That does not make the power unreal. Okay? So, how does Venezuela consolidate global power? Not by force, not by wealth, but by staying relevant when it is meant to disappear, by refusing to be erased from the planning tables, by making itself too costly to ignore. In geopolitics, being impossible to ignore is power. Venezuela has achieved that. This is why control over Venezuela matters so much. If the US can fully leverage it, US power expands. If it cannot, their limits are exposed. And powerful countries do not like limits. That tension explains the pressure, the narratives, and the constant focus on Venezuela. In short, Venezuela consolidates global power not by winning battles, but by surviving them. It turns pressure into leverage. It turns isolation into alignment. It turns time into an advantage. That is why Venezuela matters far more than we were taught to believe.